Welcome to Beer and Business. You found the best podcast for entrepreneurs. We serve crafty business knowledge, comedy, and yes, beer. And now it's time for our hosts. If he were to pat you on the back, you'd list it on your resume. It's Jake Mullins. And his beer never gets warm. It just sits there, staying frosty, waiting for him. Mr. John Winnie. And if you spell his name in Scrabble, you automatically win. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Darren Flanagan.
Mr. Flanagan with the yoga pose. How are you?
That is too funny.
It is too funny. Well, today on the show, we are live. We've got Ian Peterman on the show. Ian, welcome to the Beer and Business Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So Ian is the CEO and founder of Peterson Design Firm.
Peterman Design Firm.
Oh, I know I did it on purpose.
Ah, okay.
Because we were just talking about it before the show. So it's Ian Peterman, not Peterson, Peter Son, Peterman's. It's just Peterman.
Let's move along, shall we?
Man, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you. We're going to have a good conversation today about product and brand and all kinds of cool stuff. But before we get into that, we got to get into the really important thing that we're doing, which is having a beverage. So today, the official beer of the Beer and Business Podcast is the official seltzer. We are drinking seltzers in the studio. It's the first time we've done this.
It's a seltzer day.
It is a seltzer day. So we are both drinking different seltzers. It's important. I mean, we're doing this for awareness. A lot of people think that, the official beer of the Beer and Business Podcast, Line Creek, just brews beer, but they don't. I am drinking Ain't Afraid No Seltzer.
Yeah.
And it is a wild berry seltzer. It's actually really good.
And I've got the Knucklehead hard seltzer.
So mine's more of a, like a crisp fruit seltzer, which is actually really good. I typically don't like seltzers. I like this one. But yours is inspired by an IPA, Darren.
It is. Yeah, we've had Knucklehead before.
Yeah, the IPA beer, it's
a
delicious.
good IPA beer, and this is their Knucklehead seltzer. So it's got that citrusy grapefruit kind of finish, and it is darn good. This is definitely a poolside sipper.
Yep.
For sure. And the great thing is, if you're not, a lot of people say, I don't want to go to the brewery because they only have beer. Well, you're wrong. They have seltzer. So
they do.
And the other cool thing is seltzers are gluten-free.
They are gluten-free, yeah. So if you, like my wife, she's got celiac disease. She can't drink beer, but she can go with me to the brewery now and have a seltzer. So
now that she's watching live.
No, I do. I know. Now, I do love beer, and I'm a little jealous because what are you drinking there, Ian?
I have a definitely not gluten-free Fat Tire amber ale.
Tire.
So you live in L.A., so that's a nice L.A. beer. Straight from not L.A.
Not L.A.
No, I love Fat Tire. And then you've got a follow-up beer, too, which I have mad respect for.
I do. This, of course, is my favorite beer.
Oh, yeah.
Guinness Extra Stout.
Always have to get the extra stout. Or the nitro. Nitro version is pretty good,
awesome.
too.
Yeah,
Very good.
I enjoy it.
Yeah, Darren and I are both Irish, so we've got mad respect for Guinness. But, appreciate you coming on the show. We're excited to have you on. Before we get into that, just want to make one last mention. Line Creek, we had our business networking event last week. It was awesome. Folks, if you didn't come, we had a mayoral candidate there. We had a city council candidate there. The president of our county's Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much. Chamber of Commerce.
How many beers did you have?
I've had one seltzer.
No, at the
Seltzers don't count.
network. Yeah.
I had enough. But we had a bunch of people there, made some great new contacts. It was awesome. If you didn't come, shame on you, but you have another chance because it's every month, folks. So coming up next month, Wednesday, August 11th, go ahead and put it on your calendar now. It's 4 to 6. I was shocked at how many people were there, how many people I met. So if you missed it, don't cry. You can come see us next month.
And we ask you to register just so we can get a head count.
Yes.
You're not committed.
It doesn't cost you anything. All you do is go to beer.business. It's super simple registration. Takes you 2 seconds. That way we know that there's enough bar staff and food. There was a food truck there. It was
Is that good or what?
It was delicious. Yeah, Mad Greek had me some delicious Greek food. All right, so Ian, I want to get into your story a little bit, but before we do, we're here today to talk about product and brand and some of the things that a lot of people don't really think about as they're becoming an entrepreneur. So most people are good at a thing, Darren. When they start a business, you might be a really good plumber and think that there's a better way to do that business. You might be somebody that's good with arts and craft, or maybe see an opportunity in lawn care, whatever it is. Typically, people get into it and they really understand what they can do and how they can do it differently. What they don't understand is all the different elements of business, and that's okay because that's how most people get into business. Well, when you think about marketing, Darren, most people think advertising, getting the word out, but marketing is a lot of functions. There's 5 P's of marketing.
Five
5
P's.
Product, place, price, promotion, and people. Right? Did I get that right?
Who cares about people?
I got a
wait, that's
podcast
right.
with this idiot.
Because
Ian.
if you don't have people, nobody's buying your product. Oh, duh.
Yeah, it's kind of important, Darren.
Okay.
But I bring that up because
Minor.
there's a
Minor.
lot. Yeah, little detail.
Small detail. It's the last one. I feel like it's least important then.
Right. Yes.
Maybe you should shift it around. Maybe that would help the understanding.
Those were not in order, folks. Just want to throw that disclaimer out there. But you've I think focused primarily on a few of those P's in your business. But I'd like to kind of back up and tell the story on how you got really involved in product and service design and branding and what you guys do today.
Yeah, so I feel we could take this back really far. So when I was about 12, I decided that I wanted to be an engineer. It was out of a fighter pilot, and I didn't really want to join the military, so that kind of knocked that one out. But my dad was a designer. My grandfather was a designer. My family in general is entrepreneurial. And so from a young age, I was inundated with running a business and design and engineering. And so I count that, though my siblings did not follow me in starting a design firm. So apparently it was just me. But I got an internship when I was 16 doing design work at a laser manufacturing company. And pretty much once I started there, I never left the field. So I ended up working in different companies. I worked for HP. I've done contract work for Nike and Boeing. And then it kind of led up to, I was a partner at a design firm. Almost 7 years ago, ran that for a few years. Partners, we all went different ways, closed the company down. I was one that still wanted to do it. So I launched my now Peterman design firm, and that's the abbreviated version of how I'm here now doing all this work.
So what was it initially that got you so interested in product to chase that as a career field?
It was when I was a kid, I loved drawing and inventing things, and I really wanted to just make cool stuff. I don't know, when I was a kid, I was drawing things like submarines, and I watched too many James Bond vehicles and trying to draw like the next cool James Bond vehicle. And then it just turned into, I really wanted to help create products that push technology forward. So space is huge for me. I love the fact that we have Elon Musk alive and making SpaceX happen. Like the fact that commercialization there. So that kind of stuff was stuff I was thinking about. Only I didn't have millions and billions of dollars as a kid to do that. So other people
And
have
you
done.
weren't a robot like our friend Elon Musk.
That's it. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, come on. You just had, Richard Branson just launched
our
last
slept
week,
watch.
and then tomorrow we've got
Bezos
going up tomorrow, right?
Yep.
So that's pretty cool. And to note, there are never too many James Bond vehicles. Okay.
All right.
That is true.
Fair enough.
Love me some Bond movies.
Awesome.
Amazing
you can't-
vehicles.
You can't have enough gadgets. on
Yes.
that, so
Yes.
Yeah. To be the person who designed those would have been great.
Oh man, yeah, that would be so much fun. Just running through the fields with endless budget to make cool shit for the movies. Yeah, that would be awesome.
And physics doesn't apply, so
Right.
you can also do anything you want.
Okay, so I've got an idea. It's the dumbest thing you've ever heard of. It's not realistic at all. But let me show you a picture. Oh, that's radical. Let's do it. Yeah, let's put it in the movie.
Where does the cappuccino maker come out of the dashboard from? And it never spills, even in a high-speed car chase.
And how do you flip it over 5 times and not spill the champagne?
Right.
Doesn't matter.
It's James
Anti-gravity.
Bond. Yep.
Right. So, Ian, let's kind of start from the beginning, from a business perspective with product. What exactly, when if you're talking to somebody that's never really wrapped their head around this, what is product?
Oh,
Is that a dumb
product?
question?
No, it's
No.
I know it's not,
because
but it's just like it
different.
Broad
sounds dumb.
stroke.
Yes.
It might sound dumb, but it depends on who you're talking to, what it means. So for your service, a service is a product.
Yep.
It just happens that you personally, or whoever is doing the service, is the product. The knowledge that you're using in order to complete the task is the product. So the product is really whatever you're giving somebody else in exchange for, whatever you're getting back, whether it's cash or investment, whatever that is, whatever the product. So your product can be a service, your product can be tangible product, a digital product. Those are all products, no matter which way you do it. It's whatever you're giving away.
It's one of the most frustrating things, I think, in marketing as a function in this whole discussion, because we call them products and services. So a product is a widget. I make a basketball for my business and I have a product. But
Right.
if I cut somebody's hair, I'm doing a service, and so I have a service. But when it comes to marketing, those two things are the same, and it probably couldn't be any more confusing, but that's just...
Well, your business is the product if it's a service. And I want to read this really quick because this is straight off your website, and I think it's awesome.
So hopefully it's true, Ian.
It says bringing your products and brands to reality. And it's, at Peterman, we help visionaries turn their ideas into brands and products that change the world. I think it's fabulous. It's the way you cover it. It's simple, but it's direct. And so, as Jake is saying, you got a product or a service. If I come to you with my business and I'm like, Ian, I got to have you do this, how does that start? With
It always starts with understanding what is your actual goal. Because some people, you might bring me one idea and someone will bring me the same idea, but your goals are different. You might want to, for example, build a product. We'll call it a tangible, a widget. You want to build a widget.
Let's call
And
them items and services, so that way we don't
items.
confuse people. So if you build an item...
So we'll see, you want to build an item, right? You might want to build that item for 6 months and then sell the company and sell the idea and walk away and be done. That's one set of goals. Somebody else may want to build a legacy and an empire, and this is item number 1 of 500 that they want to launch, and they want to turn it into a giant company that they're 7 generations down are still eating off of the same company. So the way that you go about that and how you plan what you're going to do is going to be different. There's, minutia is not going to change in some ways, but that grander scale of what do you actually want to do with it impacts how we approach it and how much time and money you would invest into developing it.
So let's just let's do a hypothetical, right? Let's say that I have come up with the idea for an item, and I've invented something that is going to revolutionize the internal combustion engine on a car. And I come to you, Ian, and I say, hey, I've got this thing that I invented and designed, and it works. What does the product strategy look like? Where do we start? How would that look in the real world when you're helping somebody design a product strategy?
Yeah, so that comes down to one of the first things we do is, it's great, you have an idea, it works. Now let's do a review of it. Can we commercialize it? Can we actually produce it? Is the market interested in the product that you're developing? And that question, you can move forward whether it's a yes or a no. The great example I always give is the iPhone. If you'd interviewed people, if you'd done market research, the iPhone is not what people would have told you they wanted. They wanted a smaller flip phone with a longer battery or some other feature list. So that isn't always a determining factor, but it's something that we look at. And then it's, can we afford? Can you make the product at a cost where you can make money and people are going to actually buy it. And basically go through all these checks of, yeah, basically, is this an idea worth spending whatever amount it's going to be to actually get it to market? Once we determine that, and if you're like, yeah, that number's good, I have it, let's spend it, let's launch it, then we get into the process of refining the idea, doing the design work. We go through engineering process. We go through a design for manufacturing, basically optimizing it for production. And while we're doing that, if let's say you're starting from scratch, this is product number one, your company, you just formed it just to start this. We go through branding, we go through creating the identity, identifying your target customers, who's going to actually be buying this, where are we going to distribute it, or what kind of distribution model are you going to follow? Is it direct to consumer? Are you going to big box stores? Is it a B2B product? Does it do all three? Really breaking it down. How are we going to get it to market? Working on the marketing. And one of the other things that we do in order to make sure we're developing products that actually do make a positive impact, we've done this process of life cycle analysis. So this is something companies will do sometimes, but I'm a proponent that it should be done every time. We look at what is the end of life of this product. So if you're creating, it improves the internal combustion engine, it makes it whatever so much better. What is the end of life? Can you recycle it? What do you do with it? Is it repairable? Do you want it to be repairable? Things like that. Those are all decisions that need to be made before you go through the development process. And then once we've designed it for manufacturing, we get to that point, we say, okay, great, this is designed. We've done some prototyping. Then we go into pre-production. We source everything, we get the supply chain built up, and we start producing prototypes at the production level. So this is where the actual production company is in full manufacturing. You're just not going to probably sell anything that we make the first time. And then we refine it. We get it to the point where you're like, okay, we're good. This is what we want. The cost is still there. And at kind of each of these points, you go, okay, we designed it for manufacturing. Does the cost make sense? Should we still move forward? Because there's times when you'll hit that point and you'll say, nope, not worth it anymore. Market shifted, costs have changed, raw material has skyrocketed. Whatever those decision points are, we want to check in as we're going through. But once we get pre-production complete, then you're ready for production, and that's somewhere in pre-production is typically when you start your marketing, what people think of as the right normal marketing. You start reaching out early, you start getting people aware that you're developing it, because usually by then you have the product finalized enough that your final patents can be put in, which means you're in process. Because usually you make enough changes, or not usually, sometimes you make enough changes through that design process. By the time you get into pre-production, if you had patents at the beginning, they may not cover it completely, and you end up filing additional patents to cover what the product actually ends up being.
And you help the customers with this whole process.
Yes, I do the whole process. You can think of me as the general contractor of product development. You're not, when you go build a house, you don't call your own plumber and your own sheetrocker. You call one person and say, go find me those people, go find me a concrete pourer. That's what I do. As I act as that single point. Somebody goes, hey, I want to develop a product. Great. I will build the team around it, specialized to that product, which there's endless specialties that are involved depending on the project.
Okay, so there's a couple there. You just said like an enormous amount. Okay, and there's a few things that I want to do. First of all,
and we're not done yet.
Oh, I know. No, I know. So if you are
just scratching the surface,
how much Line Creek do we have over there? We got enough?
I can run down to the store and get more.
There's always more. First and foremost, if you're listening to that and you're like, man, that sounds like a lot. Well, if you were going to take an item to market and it was going to be, investors and multi-million dollars invest in all that kind of stuff, you want to be really, really accurate. And this type of work is critical to make sure that you don't waste your investors' money and you get it right. But if you were starting a lawn care business, you would go through a similar process, although it would be much skinnier and much more scaled back because you wouldn't need the level of intensity and research and pinpoint accuracy to make it happen. So I want to throw that out there first and foremost, because if you're listening to that and you're like, wow, that sounds like a lot, and I'm just a small business, I wouldn't need a product strategy. You probably still do.
Yeah.
And it's just not as intensive as that. But I want to go back and kind of unpack this piece by piece. So the first thing you talked about was we had somebody on the show, it's been about a year and a half ago, Mercedes Bankston.
MVP?
Minimum viable product. She was the first one to say that on the show. And that's what you're talking about in the beginning, is making sure that whatever your item or service is, can you take it to market? Are people willing to pay for it? Is there demand? Where would you sell it? Like that gut check, because there's a lot of times, Darren and I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. Darren owns Launch and Go, which is a
place.
It's a co-working office, Darren.
Yeah.
And we get a lot of entrepreneurs in here because he does a lot of events and that sort of stuff. So we talk to a lot of people that have started businesses or want to start businesses. And there's sometimes people come up to us and like, hey, we got an idea. We're going to start this business. And they start explaining it. And we're like, that sounds nice.
Keep your day job.
Like,
Don't quit yet.
How do I say this?
Maybe you need to refine it to something totally different than what you're thinking about.
Right. But I think really, go ahead. But it's just a really important thing, just to make sure. Do you have something that people are willing to pay for?
Right.
Yeah, the polite way that I address it is I say, well, you should talk to about 100 people and get their opinion first, and then if it's still a good idea, come back to me because you found a market that I didn't know existed, which is great. Good for you, man. You figured it out.
The other thing that you mentioned was, sometimes it's not. A lot of people are consumer focused to the public, and your product or service, probably more products, are skewed items are skewed to go to a manufacturer. Something that they can use to put into something else, that a different item that they're working on. And you may not see that. And with Ian's expertise, it's like, hey, have you thought about this? Yeah, you've talked to 100 people, they're all for it. But there's a lot of stuff that people are making that aren't consumer products, and they might not know how to get to the right place or to the right people to talk to. And it seems like you can help guide them there.
If you're going to make an item, it needs to be manufactured somehow.
Right. But if I've got a new manifold cover for your internal combustion engine, and it's like, I'm not going to manufacture that and go to AutoZone. I'm probably going to need to go to a car manufacturer, but don't know how. Or I might be thinking I'm going to sell it commercial, out there on the market.
No, totally.
And Ian's like, have you thought about maybe going to Chevy or Ford or somebody like that? Not Williams. But, So.
Well, and that brings up a good point, is that a lot of times when I talk to people don't realize how deep a supply chain is. Mm-hmm. Like, they don't, if you think about how many companies are actually involved, even to make this product right here.
Yes,
it's a good one.
This isn't a single company. It isn't Fat Tire just magically pops up. Oh, look, it's beer in a bottle with a cap. The cap is a manufacturer, the bottle is a manufacturer. The ingredients are probably grown.
Have you ever seen the video of a number 2 pencil, like what it takes to make a number 2 pencil?
I'm gonna Google it tonight now.
You ever seen that, Ian?
I don't think I've seen one on the Bic pen.
Yeah, it's really simple. Something is it's a little pencil. Like, what does it take to make it?
Right.
And it's fascinating how many countries and companies and just a simple little product like that, what it takes to actually get it from the forest and out of the earth and into your hand as a writing instrument. It's crazy. It really is.
And it's amazing that it's as cheap as it is too. When you actually think about it, it's like, wow, that's, in order for you to go personally fly to all those locations, that's like 3 lifetimes of pencils for you and your family.
I know, it's crazy. Yeah. So it's really interesting to say that. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't really, and I think it's just a product of the environment we live in today. I mean, you go on an app and you say, I need toilet paper, and then 2 days later it shows up at your door. Like, we've simplified the complex in many parts of our lives, and so A lot of times I think we don't understand or appreciate the complexity of a supply chain, and then how to effectively, I guess, design right that supply chain to make your item, optimize your item, to where it's marketable. Because there's a balance, right, between quality and profit margin, and there's a lot of levers that you can pull.
Profit margin?
Yeah, that's a thing.
That's a thing?
In business, yes.
Could you
It
explain
should
it to
be.
me with my business?
It
Because I don't
should be,
understand
yes.
it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, when you're talking about you help them with their prototype and their test in that model, and then you talk about future projections. Like your first prototype that you're going to make may cost you $20,000 because you've got to find somebody who's going to be able to make this product for you, set up the molding or the assembly machine and cast it, whatever that item might be. And you go, that's a lot of money. Holy cow. But you go, yes, but that's just now. In the future, this is what it's going to cost. It might be like, it's only $30 to make this thing, but it costs you 20 grand the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me, I mean, am I
Yeah. No, that's
correct?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely quite often there's sticker shock, especially people that haven't gone through the process before. Oh wow, it's like I'm gonna spend $20,000 on tooling, and I'm gonna get 20 items for this. Like, what do you mean? Like, we can only sell this for $20 a piece. What
Those
am I
are pretty
gonna do with
expensive
this?
widgets.
Um, and then
How negative is the profit margin?
it
How many
always
thousands of
really
percents?
negative at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yes, it hurts in the beginning.
It
Bad.
hurts, and it's expensive, and people don't. And some people do, and once you get into it, a lot of people run away because they realize how expensive it is. But they don't think about the tail end of, well, once you buy that tooling, it could last 15 years. You might not buy another mold for that particular part, and you could become a millionaire off of that one mold. So, is it worth it? And that's where that conversation starts to come in. So
Yeah, it's risk versus reward in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, what you guys do with product strategy is try to reduce the risk, by being very strategic in the beginning about what that product should look like, where it fits in the market, all that kind of stuff, rather than just kind of, man, I hope this works. There's a
yeah, gambling. That's just gambling. You might as well go to a casino with your money.
got a better shot. When the
Better
house always
chances.
wins, you still have better chances there. Yes.
Better chances, and if you spend that much, they'll probably give you free alcohol while you're there. So
you know what? There's
They
that.
do. They might even give you
There's-
a nice
there's-
meal to go along with it later.
there's no free booze when you do that with products. So
Yes. In
Where-
fact, I think you spend your booze money on it and therefore have zero. So that's
So you
bad.
take them. You start with an item. They come to you. You
Yep.
walk them through this first process of the prototype, finding if they actually do have a minimum viable product for a market.
At what point? I got a question. So you kind of come up with this minimum viable product. Is it at that point that you start to try to marry brand and market position with product to ensure that there's the right balance when you go to market?
yeah, you don't need to start brand. Like, you don't need a logo to go share your idea and see if you have a MVP.
Right.
Once you know that you have a product, because branding is an extra cost, and you're going to do it right, it's an extra investment. So really, the kind of the outline, if we were to talk about when branding starts, you should have already done market research, identified your target customers, floated your idea out to people, gotten feedback. Depending if it's something that's really new, if it's just a new version of something, then there's an existing market. You don't need to worry as much about MVP in terms of is the market ready for this? If it's not like an iPhone, it's not something breaking new that you're going to sell to people that have never seen something like it before. You can definitely minimize that portion, and then once you're really solid, you're like, yes, we're going to spend money on actually developing the product. That's when you can start branding. And some people do wait a little bit later, depending on how, let's say your widget is a medical device and it's going to go through a bunch of regulatory requirements. FDA may block it at the end from even becoming a product. You don't really worry about branding until you're well into the process and more close to launch than early on.
Well, let me fine tune this question a little bit. So, one of the things I think is important from a brand perspective, yeah, you don't need to have your logo and all your branding elements all figured out. But I think one of the things that's important is when you're at this phase, right? Understanding, are you a premium brand? Are you a mid-market brand? Or are you low-cost brand? Because those
Oh,
are things that
yes.
could ultimately feed into your product strategy. Because these things, they're like fingers that intertwine. They are separate functions inside the marketing organization or your marketing strategy, but they do get interconnected in a lot of ways. And you don't want to go, on your product strategy, building this ultra premium, but at the whole time you were planning on going, value brand, and you're like, oh shit, at some point we overspent on the product and we left some margin on the table, right?
Yeah, it's for me when those start happening. So you're as far as like that goes, your branding starts the second you start identifying your market. So as soon as you know who you're marketing to, that is already defining your brand.
Ah,
As far as
yes.
like the branding work, when somebody says, "I'm going to brand you," and we start generating assets, that's later. But as far as the identifying, I see marketing and branding and product as a three-legged stool. There, once you start one, you're doing the other two. Whether you're actively doing them or not, it doesn't really matter. You are, because if you started with a product, your invention, when you invent something and it's does X, you've already limited that to branding and marketing for people who care about X. You're already defining that. So the whole idea, and it's one of the reasons I do branding with product. So my product, when we do product design, my designers and engineers and branding and graphic design, they all talk to each other at the beginning, because if you design the product in a certain way, your brand may be forced into a certain direction, because you don't want to have your brand aesthetics disassociated from your product, right? Otherwise you're going to be like Chevy producing a Ford car. It still look like a Ford. People, right? It's not gonna look like a Chevy. It's not gonna look. They're gonna think they copied, and it's going to be disjointed. And so it comes down to your customer experience and who you're aiming it for. You design the product for your users. Your users define your brand. Your brand attracts the customers to the product in the first place. So if they don't all align, you're going to have some confused people trying to buy your product and then not.
So I got a funny brand story. So when we were doing the startup that ultimately bought Cricket Wireless, we were trying to come up with a brand, and it was going to be a national wireless brand. So we were spending a lot of money. But we went out to a very, very large, I'm not going to name them, very large brand company, and they were going to help us identify the brand name and the branding elements and all that. So the first process was they needed to select a name. And they said that they are going to start off with this big list of names, and then they're going to, narrow it down to like the top 100, and then they're just going to go through this process to try to weed it down to 10, and then they start doing like legal research to see if there's any, does anybody have the rights to that name anywhere, blah, 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 copywriting, all that stuff. But I'm like, so I'm sitting there with the one of the lead execs one day, and I'm like, so how do you guys come up with like the couple hundred names? And he's like, well, we get our creatives and we send them off to a vacation house for a week. And, we buy them a lot of drugs and alcohol, a couple pounds of weed, and they just sit there and, play guitars and get high and come up with names. And I'm like, no, seriously. And he's like, and then he gave me this look like, dude, I'm not joking. Like, that's what we do. And so I pressed him on it. I'm like, certainly you're joking. No, I mean, how else can you get good creative work?
Oh my
like,
God. How do I sign up for that
Okay,
job?
I know. I'm like,
There should be a
so then I'm like, you don't have HR issues with that? He's like, no. Everybody knows it's fine.
I will
I don't
will
assume you guys
say
do that.
no, but I will say the creative world is far more accepting of all that. There would be typically no HR problems if that, because if you enter HR into a creative agency, you already know what you're getting into. Otherwise, you wouldn't be working there.
And can you
But
start next week? Yeah, sure. Oh, one question. How much vacation time do I get, and how much dope do you give me every month?
no budget.
You're just
have to see your
excluded from the
direct
healthcare
manager.
plan. That's all, because we can't pay the premiums for the creative staff.
Yeah. Sign this disclaimer, please.
Right.
Yeah, funny
there's
stuff.
we don't do that for naming. I will
I
say
wasn't
that.
suggesting it. I just wanted to tell a funny
but-
story.
Part of their one of their perks is they must go to Burning Man and they must go to what's the other one?
Coachella.
Coachella.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a requirement.
You don't go to Ibiza? Oh, I'm sorry, you're not hired.
You have to have 3 validated tickets that you were present for 3 separate years, and then you can join.
Yes, exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm saying that in jest, but I mean, in all reality, the creative process is actually something that I've got a ton of respect for. It is, you don't put people in a room with drugs.
Yeah, except whoever created the marketing campaign for the Burger King with that creepy king. Ugh.
Yeah, where the hell's that come
That's
from?
one of the worst commercials.
But anyways, getting back to your logic here, I really appreciate you talking about the fact that the branding work starts as soon as you select your target audience. And I think the way that we're talking about this is probably more small, not even small, medium to large business strategy thinking. But even if you were to take this down to a smaller business or one that's just starting out, it's the same thing.
Well,
Like we're talking about the lawn care business.
Right.
Are you going to be targeting the McMansions, or are you going to be trying to do every lawn in, the supersized subdivision for $20 a week? The amount of work you put into your logo and the equipment that you buy and the people that you hire, like all those things that surround that product strategy, which in this case would be a service, they are tied back to who it is you're ultimately targeting, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it's when you go in a high end, the difference between a low end, whatever, $20 a week lawn care versus McMansions, if you don't look like you're supposed to fit, you're not going to get the work. You're not going to make the sale. So
Right.
you have to invest. And that's also how sometimes people decide whether they're going to be a medium product or a high end product. Is to be a high end product, you do have to put in the money and the time to look and feel and be a high end product. Otherwise, they'll figure it out pretty quickly. It doesn't
Yeah.
work out for you.
I mean, it's a great example, right? So if you were getting into the lawn care business and you showed up at a, $2 million house and you've got a 10-year-old mower and guys out there with scraggly clothes, you could do a great job, but you may not fit the profile that they think that they should be getting for the price that they're paying. They expected to see new equipment, guys with nice matching shirts with logos on them, clean cut, because you're charging them $500 a month instead of 100.
And they might expect different services. So that
Right.
when you're just mowing at $20, you're not really gonna do a whole bunch of like specialty arborist treatments. You're not gonna do these extra things necessarily. Whereas when you're paying more, you're like, no, we expect you to take care of the tree too, and these other things. And the same with products. If you're building an item, your features, like you could have a product that could possibly have 20 features, but if you're aiming at the lower market, you're not going to put in 20 features because they're not paying for it. It doesn't fit with what they're trying to do. And so you got to think about, and that's where you're deciding your target market. I've worked on projects where, the feature list is huge or could be, and we end up axing more than half of them because, well, the real target market isn't somebody that can afford all 20. They only can afford 11. They only really need. So you end up narrowing it down through some process to fit what's the market you're sending it to.
So at that point, I mean, you're saying they can. Do you give them options though? Could you say if it's a certain product and it's testing well, could you say we're going to give you the base, the mid, and the premium?
Oh, absolutely.
But it's still got to be cost effective. So I'm assuming you determine that, and at what point can you figure? I mean, is it pretty straightforward making that determination, or does it take a little? Sometimes it's like, oh shit, the market really doesn't like this at all. They're not buying it. Scrap it.
I mean, nothing is ever perfect. There's no crystal ball. If you ever want to look up a spectacular failure, you should If you don't know if you're familiar with Pepsi Crystal,
Oh
it's
yeah,
a multi-billion.
clear.
Oh yeah, very bad.
It was like the
It's a
Zima of
case
Pepsi.
study.
Oh God.
It was
Yeah,
awful.
It was like
it
Coke and
was
Coke Classic, but worse.
Worse, way worse.
worse, way worse, way worse. It's probably the worst beverage fail I know of. Actually,
Really.
it's
So
yeah.
give us the highlights.
So what they did is they created their product. It seemed to do well in like some early market research. It was competing against another product, I believe. Um, I said, "Oh, great, we're gonna do this." And then but they skipped the part where they actually did like a real trial run. They like did the whole ask a few people and then just straight went to we're
My
producing
mom liked it.
millions of
Oh
units,
my gosh. Wow.
millions and millions and millions of units, and then they were committed to that point. So they kind of skipped this middle part of oh we have it. Let's see if Austin, Texas will buy it. They said, "Oh, we're gonna ship it everywhere. Everywhere is gonna sell it." So they did
It's a
that.
great idea.
Went out, didn't do well, so they upped their marketing. They paid for a Super Bowl spot in marketing. One of their
I
ads was a
missed
Super
that one.
Bowl. Um,
Oh
yeah,
wow.
it was, and they spent millions and millions and millions of dollars just in ads, not including product. And then after a few, like they waited a good 5 years, I think, which
Mhm.
is about 80% longer than they should have to kill it. And it's because they knew the numbers were not there as soon as they like broadly launched it. They should have just killed it right then, donated it off to
Right.
someone, and been done. But no, they kept
We're
going.
gonna
They
make it
kept
up in
pushing it.
volume.
Like yeah, exactly. It's
Oh my
fine.
gosh.
The margins are small, but we'll sell more, right? So
No
Some
and
problem.
senior
it's
VP's idea that just kept pushing on. Well, I mean, I can see where it might have a market if they tested it. Like we've got the Coca-Cola Museum just north of us here in downtown Atlanta, right? And you, at the end of it, you go to that room and you can taste all the different Coca-Colas from around the world. And they've
oh
realized
wow,
that everybody's taste buds are different. So, you drink one for South America and it's like super sweet. Like they really jack and put a lot of extra sugar. Or Asian, you go to Japan, China, and everyone tastes slightly different. But obviously, they've done their market research and they know what the flavor profile needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
yes,
Starbucks does that in Japan. That one of their best drinks is some bubbly tea thing. It's not coffee, but
Boba.
they've done the market research.
Yes.
Obviously, Pepsi didn't do it very
they
well, and I like Pepsi. Sorry.
they did whatever they thought was market research, but was not.
Wow.
So
Wow.
Well, it's a really good example. I mean, in all seriousness, it's a great example of a very large company, a company that understands this, right? I mean, it's not their
they're
first. They're
very
one of the,
successful.
of course. I mean, they own Frito Lay. I mean, they're an enormous company. So they understand this, but yet even they made the mistake on a product. I'm Darren was joking about it, but I'm sure there were some executives really excited about it. Like, no, we got a gut feeling about this one. Let's go for
Just
it.
keep pushing.
And you bypass some of those critical steps of designing good product. And guess what happens? You end up with 100 million units that you can't sell in a big write-off.
Yeah.
Wah, wah, wah.
Some-
So
We're talking about
bonuses
that.
this year.
I mean, that's a big, huge. I mean, obviously, a huge mistake. If you're going to give somebody advice, if they're not going to seek out someone like you, and they're going to try to bootstrap this and do it themselves in the beginning,
don't.
do you have any pieces of advice like, hey, beware of this, or you definitely need to do this while you're creating your brand strategy or your brand here,
Yeah,
product design?
one of the first things, which is always heartbreaking for people, but it's very true. Ideas are not worth what you think they are. So a lot of people are afraid to share their idea and get market feedback. They won't tell anyone. Like, oh, I can't tell anyone, or oh, I have to go get a patent before I even tell anyone. And I've had people contact me. They're like, hey, I have this product. Can you help me? I'm like, yeah, tell me about it. Like, well, we're working on a patent. We can't do that. And I'm like, I'll sign an NDA. Well, then we have to pass. So they won't even do an NDA. I'm like, okay, well, you don't understand this works. And there's this huge fear of, as soon as I say the idea out loud, some big corporation is going to swoop in, steal it, and make another $1 billion.
Yep.
And the reality is they actually don't care about your idea until you've put in all the money to prove that it's worth something,
Right.
and
Then they want it.
then they might steal it. Like that's when
Right.
their patent attorneys will figure out a way to get around your patent and develop their own version, or they'll buy it, whatever the case. But they're not going to do that until you have market proof and you are valuable to them. And the other is that you just need to ask, you need to show people, you need to get their feedback, and you need to listen to them. They all say your idea sucks. Put it down. It's okay, and to start another one.
Right.
Move on.
I've actually had this experience where, somebody's wanted to talk to me about an idea, but they're like, oh, freaking out. I've actually I did this one time. I signed an NDA to talk to somebody about their idea. And it's like, oh, that sucks. I'm like, wow, all this hype and lead up. I'm like, man, I can't wait to hear what this is. And he gives me the idea. And I'm
You
like,
didn't think two-sided toilet paper was a great idea? Come
no,
on. No, it's
do not.
One-sided's cheaper. Over here.
Yeah, but two-sided lasts twice as long. So
Reversible.
Think about that.
Reversible. There we go.
Yep.
Oh boy! So you bring them through this.
Well, let me ask you a question, Holman, before you go into that. So in your company, do you guys just deal with people that are creating items or services that are bigger, or do you deal with small businesses like the guy that's going to start a landscaping company? Do you go down that low, or is that outside of your core competency? Yeah.
Yeah, I've worked with, I would say pre-pandemic, our split was about 85% small business, like under 5 people. The companies that we worked with. Pandemic kind of wiped them out a little bit, so our ratio has shifted quite a bit. But yeah, I've worked with startups, small ideas, single component products, one person solopreneurs. Yeah, I definitely do that, and then I've worked with the big companies as well.
That's good, because I think if you could help out with too on a more simplified basis.
Oh, absolutely. It's simply going to be less time. It's going to cost less to put it together than if you're like, I want to start a new automotive company. How do we do, how do we do that?
But if I was going to product and brand strategy and how to go to market, I'd want somebody like yourself that knows how to do it on a really broad scale too, so you know how to scale that down to me, because it is, while it's simpler and not as much time and care invested, it's still kind of the same thing. Like if I were to go to somebody that, help me with marketing, they're like, oh, I've done some marketing before and I'm, small business and all, you're not going to get somebody that understands. So, what are the psychographics of your customers? And the hell's a psychographic? You want somebody that gets that can help you, understand, oh, okay, that's what I need to be thinking about, and point them in the right direction, right?
Yeah, and it's far easier to, because I sat down, I was asked the question like, okay, well, what's the process? Can you actually just write out the entire process of product development? And I think it's about 150 pages of me writing out all the steps.
You summarized it.
Yeah, I'm actually writing it in a book as part of a book right now, because it's like, okay, well, I should write this out. I get this question enough. But that's like the most complicated version. So it's really easy for me to cross out lines and be like, oh, we don't need this. Or like whole sections. We can remove whole sections and narrow it down. It's way easier than taking 5 items and being like, this is supposed to be 150 pages long. What's in the gaps? There's nothing there. So yeah, it's absolutely easier once you do bigger projects. You can scale it down and say, you need these. These are the core things that you need.
I think one of the other things that's really important too is we've kind of focused on this conversation as being what you do in a startup, but it's also for somebody that's got an established business. If you've, let's just, go back to the landscaping company. I started a company, kind of bootstrapped it, threw a name on it, and all of a sudden my business is growing, and now I've got employees, and I'm like, man, this thing's actually becoming like a real business. That can also be a time to say, you know what, I need to talk to somebody about my brand strategy, my product, and maybe I need to to isolate certain pockets, because right now I'm everything to everybody, but that's not profitable. And how do I become more targeted and take this from a business that's now viable to a bigger business, a better business, one that's more profitable, easier to run. And that could also be a great time to bring somebody in to talk about brand strategy.
The classic example is the cafe in the next town over. And you go to that cafe, and their menu is, it's like 6 pages.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? And it's like, you guys have been in business this long. You can't, there's got to be some items here, or pages of items that nobody's really ordering. And you could probably scale down now to, to control your food cost and everything else.
Absolutely.
So let's work on redesigning your business model.
We might have a lead for you.
So, they need it really bad.
Optimization. Well, it's funny you mentioned that
word right there.
Yeah.
Optimization. I want you to touch on that, though, after your answer, what you're going to say.
Well, that's actually kind of part of this, so it'll be a good segue. Is you mentioned we're not just for startups, and really the time to bring in someone like me is any time of growth or acceleration. So yeah, that absolutely is startup, because you're going from zero to something. And it's also when you're wanting to grow, you're like, oh, well, I've been doing this one service or one product and it's really great, but my clients and customers are asking for something new. What do I do now? How do I grow that? How do I scale it? Or, or the other option is really just this, you're growing and no startup is efficient. We'll just put that out there. They're all super inefficient, super terribly inefficient. And it's okay when you're small and your profit is little, because, a margin of error is only a few dollars, but it's a percentage. And once you get bigger, then you get to the point where you have to optimize. And that's where maybe you reduce your menu from 6 pages to 3. And cut out some of your extra costs, or one. Well, maybe we do it in steps. Maybe it's
80%
down to
of the
3.
people are ordering meatloaf. Why don't you just have
meatloaf and a few sides, and you're probably killing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So there's a lot of optimization there that happens.
And that optimization, correct me if I'm wrong. I might be using the wrong phrase, but you said you're talking about growth and expansion. But the other thing is, it could be you're targeting to the wrong market. And does that fall under more of optimization, would you say?
Yeah.
To generate the best, it's like, yes, I'm capturing this much market share, but all of a sudden they bring in somebody like you, and Ian's going, you could make better margins or have a better capture, a larger market share if you targeted these people instead. Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming you can help potentially steer them in the right direction and make their life a little bit easier.
Yeah, because that comes down to, you're starting as a single person starting a company, right? And you go, okay, I have a product or a service, and I'm going to go market it to these people, and it works. It works good enough to grow, and maybe it was really good. Maybe that was a perfect alignment, but the market also shifts. So there's a lot of work that happens. 10 years later, 5 years later, companies will go through a rebranding process. And part of that is because their market may have shifted. They may have been targeting, 30-year-old men before, and their market has shifted to more of a 50-50 men and women, but they're in their 40s. And their demographic has changed. So depending on the product, you may have where your product was really liked by one generation, the next generation doesn't like it, but that generation still likes it. And so now you're marketing not to 20 and 30-year-olds, you're marketing to 40 and 50-year-olds. And in another 20 years, you're marketing to retired people. So your market might shift, your branding may need to shift. And that's all optimizing. It's being aware of who's actually buying it. And there's a lot of startups are also terrible at this. But it's very easy to do. They should do it. Is tracking your data. Like, if you don't track who's buying your product, it's really hard to know what's happening. But if you do, and it's really free, it's cheap to do. Like, it's not that expensive, so just do it.
Let me take that a step further, because what you're saying is really relating to me. I actually was talking to somebody, actually a fan of the show, talked to him about a year and a half ago, I think, owns a fencing company, putting up fences. And it was funny because I don't know how we got on the subject, but we were talking about business strategy and consultants and, so long story short, he was in a period of hyper growth. Kind of like you said, he's like, I got to bring somebody in. He had the data. He didn't have time to analyze it. And one of the biggest things that he found was he had the largest group of customers that they served. Very, very, and it was a product and positioning strategy. The largest group, they took up about 75% of the firm's time and made up about 10% of their returns.
Oof.
And once somebody sat down, and all the data was there the entire time.
Yep.
They had it. They were running and gunning. They were in this hyper growth mode. They were focused on helping clients, and they were in it, but they didn't have time to step back and look at it. And once somebody looked at it, they're like, why are you doing this? And he's like, I have no friggin' clue. How do we stop? And that's what they did. They worked on their strategy, their branding and positioning strategy, their product. So they had product. They didn't make things or service. But in their product strategy, they removed services from their menu because they're like, these don't make us money, but these other ones make us an enormous amount of money and take a quarter of the time.
Right. Well, and that's where a lot of when you're in those growth periods, it's the difference between working in your business, which is what you should be doing, and working on your business, which most likely you should be hiring out unless you are a marketer or you understand business. But if it's especially service based, where you're bringing in some expertise like that, where you're like, I just know, like, I can go do this because I've done it for 20 years. That's going to be way harder to replace. And so if you're that person, you shouldn't work on your business. You should work in it and then have somebody else work on the business for you and be business focused, and then tell you, hey, we have this data and there's 10% of your profits coming from these people taking all your time.
So, well, we had Kristen Selliers on. It's like sometimes it's time to rebrand at certain points because to capture a market. But my question is, what you don't know, right? So if I have like Launch and Go here, I've got a co-working office. I kind of sort of know who my clients are, but even though I can look at the data and go, this is the majority, what if there's a whole market out there that I don't even know about? I mean, can you help somebody do the research and find out that there's a whole, huge customer base that is going to use your product or your item or your service, but you don't know it because it's not in the data?
You should try marketing to people without a criminal record, Darren. Transform your business, just saying.
Well, Jake, you wouldn't be sitting here then. So.
Touche. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so that's the difference between, like, there's two kinds of data in that scenario. There's the owned data of, I know I have this person buying my product. So your customer, your data, who's going to your website, like that kind of information. And then you have external market data, and that's where market research, and I work with market researchers that look at global or local, whatever scale you want to, of data. That's how you get people that are like, oh, the market cap of this industry is $4.5 billion, and this is the number of customers, right? So you have, in order to get that research, and then they break it down. So there's entire companies that do surveys and market research and market data, and they can tell you an estimated, there's beer is sold X number of dollars in these types of stores in these types of areas. Like, you can get very granular.
Sure.
So you can. So if you work with someone like me, I would be able to work with a marketing team, market research team. It isn't even just marketing. All they do is research. All they do is figure out who's buying what, when, and where, and then get that information and say, hey,
don't do the drugs.
Yeah, they do the spreadsheets.
Right. You don't want them doing the drugs. You want accuracy from them. They're data nerds. They do Mountain Dew, not drugs.
Right.
It's different. Barely different.
So I'm thinking about
related.
Barely different.
It takes Darren a minute to get some of my jokes.
I'm with it. I'm trying not to lose my question. Like, there's a guy I know in town, and he makes these amazing waffle cookies.
Oh.
Right? And they're
sounds
fabulous.
delicious.
They're
Stroopwafel?
dynamite. Yeah.
Oh
But
God.
and this is just hypothetically speaking, so I hope he's not like, why are you trying to change my business? But I mean, for years he's been going to market. He's trying to get shelf space in the stores. He may be thinking about this all wrong. I mean, he's spending a lot of time and money, and it might be somebody who goes, have you thought about going to Hostess or somebody like that and selling them your product? You manufacture the product for them, or you sell them the recipe. Take your money and run, because they may pay you a chunk of change. And it's like, you mentioned this briefly in the beginning, like, which place am I going? And right now he's trying to go consumer, and he may be missing the other market going straight to commercial. And that can be a shift as well that you guys can help with, right?
Absolutely. That has to do with determining your target market. So that's and I've worked with companies that do both. So it's also not an either or necessarily. And some people think of it as a either or, like, oh, I'm going to go, license this product. I'm going to go sell my recipe, and then I'll never do anything. But there's plenty of companies that, it's like
Could be an all of the
Kroger,
above.
Kroger
Right?
branded, right? Like Albertsons and Kroger, when they have their product, it's a white labeled product. Kroger does not bake.
Right.
not on that scale. Like their bakery has some, but not on that scale. And so there's sometimes a different strategies that you put together. People don't even think about it. It's not mix and match is an option here, and you can choose and pick. So there's a lot of ways to do that, and it really comes down to partly what do they want? What is their goal?
Right.
So if they your example, if they really like just running their bakery and making waffle cookies, well, selling the recipe and not being able to bake is not an option, because that would defeat the point. Like, they're doing it because they love doing that. Or if there's like, well, I just want to make enough money to retire and that's it, then yeah, maybe the chunk of change from Hostess would be enough to do that, in which case should be going after that to see.
Let's talk about this for a second, because I think this is really interesting. So Darren's example, right now, maybe the way that he's going about it is just trying to get exposure.
Right.
But maybe this is one of those things where you step back and it's like, okay, let's identify our target market. So let's identify the psychographics of the target market, right? It's somebody with disposable income that likes food and that has traveled to Belgium. Now, you might say, well, that's kind of, that's pretty specific, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's probably millions of people.
Right. Well, to Belgium.
I mean, that's probably millions of people, honestly, in the United States.
In the US.
So if you were to start from that basis to say that's my target, and I'm really simplifying this, Ian, so forgive me because I'm not an expert like you.
Well,
but if we started from that basis, then it's like, okay, so where do we find these people?
so I would actually say that you should always do that. The best marketing, and I'm not the one that came up with this, so I won't claim credit, but it's
I should have. I would have known that.
well, you could look it up. So,
Okay.
but you should never have a broad, even if you are a pencil company and literally everybody on the planet with hands can use your product, you shouldn't market to everyone, because marketing to everybody means that nobody cares. It's very lackluster.
Right.
So what you just said is what, as a hypothetical, is what should be done. You should narrow it down to as small of a group as makes sense. And then because those people, if you do marketing right and you have a good product that people enjoy, when you do that, those people will become what are sometimes called your super fans. They're going to tell everybody else how amazing that waffle cookie is. They're going to host a podcast and say, you should check out this guy's waffle cookies. And now you're promoting for them. All of your customers are your promoters. So it's in marketing, narrower is better, even if you have a broad product.
Or Stucky gourmet sauce.
Right. By the way, in Belgium, pretty much half of what I ate was stroopwafel. It's delicious. I mean, so anybody that's been there comes back like,
A waffle in a cookie form with honey.
Oh, dude!
How could you go wrong?
Yeah, it's amazing. And then the Belgian waffles with the pearl sugar in it. Like, why doesn't this exist everywhere? Well, you know what, it does. Because once I came back, all of a sudden I started getting the ads in my Amazon feed for pearl sugar. I'm not making this up. No, but
They know where
going
you've
back
been.
to I mean, the brilliance of this, right? I went to Belgium and I came back and I'm getting advertised for pearl sugar. And I'm like,
Well,
ooh, click.
I think,
I need that.
and now, but if you turn
Monthly
around and you come
subscribe.
back and you've got like some certain, a sprocket or some electronic chip that you've designed, this is something that people can still come to you and say, Ian, I'm trying to find the market for this. I've got a design for this, new sprocket that'll improve efficiency and blah, blah, blah. The market's going to be totally different. And it's going to be totally different client base. And you can help folks find that market as well.
As long as it's
Yeah,
not
it's
salty.
Well, it's a lot smaller market. I'm sure you may be finding
well,
4 companies who are interested in this product versus 400,000 individuals who are interested in something like that.
but in B2B, you might be selling 1 million of those sprockets to one
Right.
customer. So,
Mm.
that's where it's customer. Yeah, there's
know.
4 people that like it, but they really like it.
Yeah. Well, my dad used to be a manufacturer's rep years ago, and he was the middle guy. And it's like he would tell about an order that he made for one company, and he sold nuts and bolts and screws. So it's like, man, I just sold 2 million screws to this company from this manufacturer, and it's like, holy cow, that's a big order. And then he goes, yeah, well, it's like 1/10 of a cent per screw that the total commission is on. But there's a market for that. Like they needed this certain screw to go in this product they were building at their company.
Well, dude, sometimes all it takes is one shot.
I know.
There's a guy at
But it's like,
AT&T.
It costs $200.
No,
in the end, when you
check
do the
this out.
math, it's like, woo, $200 order.
Check this out. There's a guy at AT&T, and he was loaded, had tons of money, and he was in B2B. And so one day I'm asking somebody because the guy like had exotic cars and was just. So I asked somebody one day, I'm like, what's the story with this guy? Like, oh, he landed the federal government account. It's like, oh. What else has he done?
That would do it.
That's it. That's it. He just landed that account, and he's filthy rich.
He used to, prior to that, he used to sell hammers to the military.
Right. Yeah. Before that, he sold ice to Eskimos. Didn't do very good, but But
Hammers
seriously, like,
to
all
the
he did,
government
one
would get
account,
too.
and the
Yeah.
dude was set for life.
That's
So
it.
just to prove the point,
all it
it
takes.
could be one big deal and completely transform your life and your business.
Yeah, and there's a rabbit hole here, but you can also become one of the acquired companies. Like people
Yeah.
don't think about how important a supply chain is. And so if you become a cog in a machine that makes somebody billions and billions of dollars, you become very important. And you could be acquired. You could end up selling your company to just become owned by whoever buys the most of your product. So there's many different options and paths that you can take, and that's like that goes back to like the very beginning of what do you want to do with what's your goal with this idea and this company that you have.
You can design an app that never made any revenue at all and just cost millions of dollars and get acquired and live on an island somewhere.
Right. Well, there was that movie with, what
do
was
it.
it, Ryan Reynolds, and he invented the sleeve that goes outside the coffee cup or something like that, and then
Oh, I don't
sold
know.
the company, and he's just
I've never seen it.
loaded.
Chick flick.
Something simple like that.
Yeah, he watched it. Not me. I didn't watch it.
Long time ago. But, so now we're on to the process of it might be time. We're trying to scale or rebrand or capture a new market, new audience.
Right.
And then, what are the mistakes that people make at that point? What should you be aware of? I mean, things that you shouldn't ignore, like it's a big freaking flashing neon sign telling you, don't do this, get the out of here. And they ignore it. I mean, what are those like?
I there's a lot of those. So we won't have time for all, but it's a lot of it comes down to, if we're saying we've identified the next market, like we know who we're going to go after next, we've identified this new market we weren't going after, or the shift that needs to happen. One of the biggest points of failure is making that decision and then starting the process and getting cold feet and pulling back. because that just ends up spending a bunch of money. You're going to be unhappy with whoever did your design. Like nobody's going to be happy with anybody, and you're going to be back where you were. And so the one of the biggest things is just if you make the commitment to do it, just do it. Like you've already done the research, you've proved that this works. So don't pull the plug on a project unless there's another red flag. And cold feet is not a red flag. That's not that's not a
Okay.
thing to pull it for. But as
The
far as
guys that
like
were trying to talk Pepsi into shifting strategy in Pepsi Crystal, and they're like, "The hell do you know?
Pepsi
Clear
Crystal.
Pepsi is the way to go."
Oh, no, it's not. It's called Sprite.
Yes. Not so good, guys. Not so good at all.
Okay.
so as long as you don't do that, the next error points are usually, you're not aware of new data. So the other bad thing is to lock into that and then ignore market changes. Because if this product, sometimes this rebranding or launching a new product, it could take 12 months, it could take 18 months in order for you to develop a new product or modify a product, adjust your brand. And if the market makes a big shift during that time and you don't shift with it, you're going to end up in the same way, only having spent more money as if you just quit halfway through. You're going to end up where you planned to be, but it may not align with the market. So, there's certain sectors, especially if you're in a sector that changes technology, you're on a 9 to 18 month cycle of technology changing. So if you're not aware and following that change, if you're sticking with your one point, you're going to be wrong. You're going to end up being outside of where you want it to actually be. So being aware of that is really important, and being willing to shift. So if you're working with someone, say, I'm telling you, you need to shift the product because of all this information, that's usually a time to shift it, not to say, oh, well, we made a plan 6 months ago. It's perfect. It'll never shift. That can be a really big flag, and it can sometimes be, those are one of the flags too that will end a project. You may go, well, the market has shifted so much that actually what we had before is totally fine. We don't need to do anything, and then we'll stop a project for that as well. That's very rare that happens, but that can happen where things will shift back on a market.
One of the things too that I'd like to talk about, Ian, that I've seen this happen both in big business and with small, and I'll talk about how it manifests. But when you deal with whether it's a new startup or somebody that's in one of those hyper growth, he's getting into the stout.
There's the Guinness.
I am.
I can smell it.
Yeah, all the way out here on the other
Oh,
side
right
of the country.
right through the mic.
Oh, it's like smell-o-vision.
It has a certain.
baby. Yes,
It does.
It's a
Welcome
signature
home.
Guinness Open.
Sorry, we love all beer. We love our Line Creek, but that right there is mother's milk. I'm
I'm enjoying my seltzer, but what I would do to get a little drag off of that stout. Anyways, one of the things I've seen happen is when you're going through that process of trying to reinvent your brand and your product and all that stuff, is not having alignment through all of the marketing functions. So,
Yes.
product and price and, the promotion strategy and who we're targeting, these things don't line up. So here's how I see this manifest itself in big businesses. You have people that, these functions get separated by different people or different departments if the company is big enough. Well, they don't communicate well, right? So product is making enhancements. Maybe they're talking to brand, but they haven't talked to the price people. Or if it's a small business person, I've seen it happen to where they just don't agree with it. Like, we'll go back to the lawn care company. So you sit down with somebody like, hey, we're going to go up market. You're at the place where you can invest in better machinery. You're going to get nice shirts. You've got good people, and we're going to go up market. And so you sit there and you do the market research, and you're like, hey, we need to take your basic services from $25 a week to $50. And they're like, my customers won't pay that. I can't do that. I'm going to keep it at 25. So now we're changing a product strategy, but price is not aligned. You got to get that pricing strategy aligned so the business is in congruence. And I've seen this happen. And I'll give you an example. So I did some consulting work for a company, and I was trying to help them figure out, they were in a rut. So one of the biggest things that I found is this was one of the issues that they had was that their price and their brand strategy were completely out of whack. And so one of the things I did is I asked them, I said, hey, can I get your permission to talk to some of your best clients, and tell them that I'm going to be talking to them and, helping you figure out where opportunities are in your business, blah, blah, blah. And absolutely. So they sent me 5 customers. I talked to all 5 of these people. Every single one of them was like, we've actually talked to them. We don't think we pay enough. I'm like, what? You've actually told them that they're not charging you enough money? Yeah. So I went back and I told the owner of the business, I'm like, hey, here's the feedback that I'm getting. I've done research. Your price too low? He's like, no, we can't charge that much. And I'm like, dude, your best clients
The market is
are
telling you they
like, hey, dude, you should
pay.
probably charge us double. I'm just saying. And he didn't want to do it. Eventually, we talked him into it, but I'm like, we had to beat him over the head with it. It's like, dude, you're out of whack here. You got to charge more.
Yeah, there's somebody.
And he raised his prices, and nobody bitched. They didn't lose one customer, not one. And he needed somebody to hit him over the head with it.
Well, that's something that is actually a very common people problem. So a lot of people, especially people that own their companies, they don't ever raise their prices. They like start at the entry, I'm new, and then they just get comfortable, and we're all creatures of habit. So we get very comfortable, like, oh no, that would be painful. Like that, I wouldn't like it if my bill went up double. So why would I do that to someone else? Well, that's because it's been 20 years and your experience is greater. Like that's why you go up.
Inflation.
Right.
Yeah, inflation.
Changes in the business.
Still happen.
Market value.
And ironically, this company that I'm talking about, so that what they were providing to their clients in terms of services had expanded over the years. So it's like we used to do A, B, and C, and now we're doing D, E, and F as well. And the pricing never changed. It's like, but you're doing more for the same price. It's like you got to charge more. Yeah, it's just funny to hear you say that because I've seen it before, and I'm giving this one example, but I've seen it on more than one occasion where a company grew. And it grew in prominence. It was targeting different customers. It got better, and pricing never changed to reflect. And that's just one example, but I'm bringing that up just to say that you got to make sure that all those marketing functions are in alignment, especially if you're going to change product or branding strategy as that company or that service or product evolves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, they're all tied together. So when one is out of alignment, it's noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
People will start to notice it, and they may stick with you because you're cheaper, but they will tell you to increase your prices. So
I'll keep paying the cheaper one, but I told them, I'd gladly pay more.
Well, at that point, I feel like it's also self-preservation for the clients. Like we want you to actually exist in the future. If you don't charge enough money, you're not going to exist, and then we're going to have to find somebody to do the awesome work you do. So do us all a favor. Let us pay you more so you don't go under. Let's do that.
That is exactly the conversation we had. They're like, listen, these guys are really good. We want them to be here long term, and I feel like they may not be able to survive on their pricing. I'm like, thank you. Can you please write this in an email and send it to me? Because I'm going to talk to the owner.
Well, that's the whole supply chain value. Like they were offering a service that company needed. It wasn't a want, because otherwise they would have kept the cheap price. They're like, oh, we want this. It's super cheap. Great. We need this. We need our suppliers to function. And that's where you get big companies will vertically integrate, and they do that because they see the management of one of their suppliers faltering, and they're not pricing, they're not operating well. So they go, okay, well, we need that part. We're going to buy the whole company now and fix it so that we still have our part come in. And
it's a great example, and it goes back to the conversation that we had earlier, and that is the complexity of the supply chain. It's amazing how many things, like even assembly, has become bifurcated, right? Where you've got, let's just say you're making a widget, and it's not like the individual components are built in all these places and then sent to one place to be assembled. A lot of times it's like, well, there's a sub-assembly that's done in Vietnam, and then there's another part that's assembled in China, and another part that's assembled in Mexico, and then final assemblies in U.S. Mm-hmm. And it's like it's assembled in 4 places and manufactured all over the world. it becomes really, really complex, but also extremely strategic and important for the company's, survival. And I mean, I think it's just the nature of the business that we're in, and it fosters a lot of these situations where it's like, hey, not only do I have a strategic partnership with that company, but I need them to stay around, because without them, we're not sure that our final product stays competitive.
Right.
That's a big statement.
Well, and and people are becoming more aware. Like I've had more and more conversations, especially with people wanting to build ethical and sustainable supply chains. Because before it was like all behind a nice little veil, like, oh, it's a company in the U.S. That's fine. It says U.S. made, but if you look at the legal requirement for what U.S. made is, it's a percentage of components assembled here.
Well, and it could even be
right.
like on a smaller scale. That this sounds like big business talk, but it can even be on a smaller scale. You start that landscaping company, Darren, and there could be an equipment dealership that offers you special leasing rates and discounted service pricing and all this kind of stuff, and does extra things to keep your machines in service. And you're like, man, if I lose this John Deere dealership, like, I don't know that I could be in business anymore, because of the things that they do to ensure that my equipment stays functioning and low cost, right? I mean, it might be a bad example, but there's all kinds of relationships like this that exist where it's like, if I lose this piece that's not part of my company now doesn't make it.
Well, that's why Ian just like vertical integration is the term you just used a minute ago, and it's like
Vertical is different than horizontal.
This is so important to us, and this is the only company. If we don't have this item from them, we can't make our product.
Right.
And so if they're struggling and they're not willing to survive, well, just buy them out. And that way we can still make that part.
Yeah.
So we can make our final product to stay in the market, which we're making tons of money on.
Yeah.
Like you bring up the iPhone. What's it at now? Like $1,200 or something to buy one?
The entry level.
Yeah, and then you look
the one that actually has got memory. It's
then,
like
then you look at the cost of what it
mortgage.
takes to manufacture it, and you go, "There's margin in there."
Yes, absolutely.
That's why Apple has, I think it has the most cash on hand of any big business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're
probably any country.
No, their cash reserves.
Because the U.S. has no cash on hand; it's all debt. So I mean, they might be the richest entity that exists.
Yeah,
I mean, could be right.
Maybe Dr. Evil works there.
It's good for their stock. It's like, how much do you have in cash? Although the cash reserves aren't.
Look, we can buy small countries. It's fine. We're good.
No, you can buy large countries now. You've actually graduated. You can
moved up.
You can buy all the countries. Yes.
We can buy mid-level countries now. That's totally fine.
I bought an island. It's called Australia.
The people there really appreciate it.
Trying to move all the people off of it so I can have it all to myself.
That's going to cost more money.
Thanks, Tim Cook. You
anyway,
wonderful man. You.
What else do we need to cover here? What are we missing?
Here's what I want to. Here's what I want to do. Where do we finish this off? I think, Ian, we want to make sure that those that are listening to the podcast, we've got a lot of loyal listeners around the world. I want to make sure that we're identifying the ideal client that needs to reach out to you. So, as you stated, it's any company that's in a hyper growth mode. That could be startup. That could be, I'm just starting to get my feet underneath me. It could also be established, small, medium company, even large. It's like, hey, we need to take this to another level, or maybe it's one particular product line. So, anybody that needs to take, revenue or returns from a certain point and grow it, those are the companies that really need to think about product strategy.
Yeah, it's all, if you're in growth, you're either stagnant, which means you need to grow or cut costs, one of the two, and that's all how you get growth out of it. And that's where you end up needing more people and more resources and new thoughts and ideas typically. So that's where we come in.
I always say to people that businesses are either growing or decaying. There's nothing in between. There's no such thing as a static company. You're either growing or decaying. And so if you're not growing, you're going the opposite direction. But when you are growing, if you want to grow more, I think the moral of the story is you should probably have somebody helping you. And as you said, have an expert working on your business, helping you with the product and brand strategy and figuring out how do you do it right. Because you can only go so far with willpower. It works a lot in the beginning when you're just starting up and you're like, I'll run through walls and I'll make it work. But at a certain point, you got to have the power of data.
Hiring somebody like Ian means less days curled up in the corner crying.
For everybody
More sleep.
except you.
Yeah, right. So, and for the business,
It
but
means,
I like the. Yeah.
I would say it means more sleep too. There's only 24 hours in
Yeah.
a day. You can only, I've done the hours before. There's only so long you can work 20 hours a day before you actually go crazy. So there's
Wait, you can own a
there's a-
business and work less than 20 hours a day?
Yeah, I
You
do
should
that.
write a book about that.
Dude,
No.
we got to talk.
So-
Hell yes.
But I like
want that
I
plan.
like the standpoint from the beginning where if I've got a product that I'm designing, I'm going to bang my head against a lot of walls. And if I contact Ian and his company, I'm going to have a lot less headaches, and he's going to probably get me to the finish line faster, whether it's going to be success or failure. And to me, that seems to be worth it right there, because
Yeah.
we've dealt with, we've heard of people who have had a stroke of luck. They've been at the right place at the right time, like Stucky Sauce. It's like, oh, you guys already went to a how did you find a co-packer so fast? And it was really
Stroke of luck.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Not everybody's
And
lucky.
you're going to bang your head. But to me, this is the smart way to do it.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Totally. And the funny thing is, so just kind of going, I want to take this full circle before we tell people how to get a hold of you. But the thing is, like, going back to my experience with AT&T, and we were doing that startup, it was AT&T at the time, enormous company. And what did we do? We brought in outside help for our product strategy, for our brand strategy, and for several other things in the marketing function, even though we had a brand manager, we had a product manager, we had a distribution manager, we had a pricing team, we had all those things, and we were still bringing external companies on for their expertise because we knew it from our narrow perspective. And they thought about things broader and, quite frankly, better than we did.
A lot of people don't see that. A lot of big companies are smart and do that. They get another opinion, and they use a lot of outside resources to help them move along. And small to mid-sized companies don't realize that. And it's like,
Right.
no, I could do it myself. I got this one person, my brother's second cousin, who is in this business, and he's going to do it on the side. And it's like, okay,
Get a free
dumbass.
logo.
Right?
Logos by Cousin Eddie.
Well, that's a good point. When I worked with Nike, I was they had, probably 30% of their workforce was independent contractors, and then they had everything from like 5-person agencies, which is where I was
Thank
at,
God he didn't say
to no, they don't. Maybe some of the agencies they hire from Fiverr, but they then hire giant. They have huge companies, multi-million-dollar agencies that they hire for a product. Like when they launched it was a new women's sportswear line. It took, I think it was like 10 agencies and probably 50 contractors, in addition to Nike's internal team, just to launch one product line.
I
That was it.
totally believe it. It's crazy. So, but when there's that much money on the line, you want to make sure you're pinpoint accurate. So
I'm sure they made $1 billion off of it, so
Let me
it's all good.
Right now. One quick question. You were saying there's a 150-page thing, and you did mention something about a book. Are you really writing a book that's
really
going to
am.
market? Okay.
cool.
What's the name of it, and when's it coming out?
It's called Conscious Design, and it's going to be coming out probably around August, September time.
Oh, cool.
Editing's taking a little bit longer. I was going to try to have it out in July, but
And we
editing.
find
Got
it
that
on.
person sending you the emails like, Jesus, Ian, that's a lot of freaking typos, man.
All right. One more. What's the name of the book? One more time. Conscious Design.
Conscious Design.
And where can people find that?
I'll be launching on Amazon.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
Cool. And for those that have been listening, if you want to get in touch with
If.
Peterman Firm,
You should.
well, when you call
When.
them, just go to petermanfirm.com. And if you're watching, whether you're live or you've tuned back in after we recorded, you can see it on the screen there. It's I got this, Darren. I got it. I swear. PetermanFirm.com, and it will be in your show notes. So if you're listening, whatever podcast app you're listening on, there's a link to the website in it. So we made it really easy. Even Darren can find your website, Ian, and that's saying something.
I
because
did.
it's
I
Darren
found it.
Flanagan.
Well, you read from it at the beginning, so
Ta-da.
that was great.
Ta-da. Well, man, we appreciate you coming on. This has been really helpful, really educational, and I hope that whether you're watching or you're listening in, you've gotten something from this, because it's such a complicated topic, and it's one of those things that when we get into business, especially as entrepreneurs, we don't spend enough time thinking about it and strategizing on it, in my humble opinion. And I think if you do, you'll be rewarded.
Definitely.
As long as you don't spend too long.
Right.
Don't wait
Analysis
5
paralysis, right? Yeah. Just get it done. Start working on it. So listen, we appreciate you coming on, Ian. This has been awesome.
Thank you.
A little jealous you're drinking that extra stout. I might have to follow suit later on, but in the meantime, Lion Creek's had us covered. I've been just switched over to this Knucklehead seltzer. It's really good. So go out and get some, folks. Well, thank you for listening or watching. If you've watched, folks, we will see you next week.
See you.
We did it.